Okay, so today I want to discuss what I think is the single most dangerous question in the world right now. What happens if the United States actually invades Iran on the ground? Not more bombing, not another aircraft carrier, not one more Pentagon briefing full of words like precision and deterrence. I mean, American ground troops going into Iran in large numbers and trying to take and hold territory because Donald Trump just went on television and told the American people that America is on track to complete all of its military objectives very shortly. Iran is going to be hit even harder over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and that America is winning whenever a president starts saying we are winning this many times. I always get very nervous because if you are really winning, you normally do not need to keep announcing it. And at the same time, Peter Hegseth is talking about something much larger than Iran. He is talking about a wider North American security perimeter, a bigger continental strategy, a world in which America stops thinking like a global empire and starts thinking like a fortress. So people look at this and say Trump is crazy. Trump is impulsive. Trump is chaotic. He is picking fights with Iran while threatening Greenland, talking about the Panama Canal, pressuring Canada and Mexico, taking Venezuela, and generally acting like a man spinning 10 plates at once. I want to argue something much more serious. I think there's a logic here. I am not saying it is a good logic. I am not saying it is moral. I am not even saying it will work. I am saying there is a logic. And if you do not understand that logic, then you will misunderstand not only the Iran war, but the kind of world some people in Washington may now be trying to build out of the wreckage. So let us start with the basic military question. Can America invade Iran successfully on the ground? My answer is simple. A ground invasion of Iran would be one of the hardest major military operations any country could attempt in the modern era. And the reason is not ideology first, it is geography first. Look at the map. Iran is huge. It is about 4 times the size of Iraq. It has around 90 million people. And when you look at the terrain, you immediately see the problem. If American forces come from Iraq, which is the most obvious route, they run straight into the Zagros Mountains. Those mountains are not background scenery. They are the battlefield. They are exactly the kind of terrain where a defender can hide, wait, hit, and disappear. If America tries to come in from the east, then it is not mountains first. It is desert first, long distances, terrible exposure, awful logistics, and you are still very far from Tehran. If America comes from the south, from the Gulf, it still faces long lines, rough interior terrain, and a defender that has spent decades preparing for exactly that possibility. So before we even talk about politics, before we even talk about oil, before we even talk about the global economy, the physical shape of Iran already tells you this would not be a clean operation. It would not look like Kuwait in 1991. It would not look like Iraq in 2003. It would not even look like Afghanistan in the first few weeks when the opening sequence still fooled people. It would be slower, harder, deeper, and much more punishing. And then there is the troop math. America has roughly 50,000 troops in the broader Middle East right now. That sounds like a lot until you compare it to the actual mission people are casually describing when they say invade Iran. If you want to conquer, occupy, and hold a country this large with this population, with this terrain, you are not talking about 50,000 troops. You are not talking about 150,000 troops. You are not even talking about 500,000 troops. You're talking about numbers that begin to look like social mobilization, not just military deployment. America's entire active duty force is around 1.3 million. And people are talking as if Washington can just pick up a country of 90 million people and sit on it. The math does not work. Now, here's the part that should worry you. Even though the invasion would be a nightmare, there are real signs that it is at least being considered seriously. We have reserve activation language. We have prediction market money moving in that direction. We have the strange little social signals that always appear around big military preparation, Pentagon overtime, the city mood changing, the ecosystem around Washington starting to look like people are getting ready for something larger. And yes, I know some of these signals sound funny. Pizza deliveries, empty bars near military offices, that kind of thing. But these signals exist because war planning has a rhythm. Bureaucracies under pressure behave in recognizable ways. So let us do this properly. Let us use game theory. Let us ask what happens if America actually sends ground forces into Iran. The first thing that happens is the most deceptive thing. For a short time, it may look like America is winning. CNN will fill the screen with maps. Retired generals will circle positions. Anchors will say progress is being made. Certain areas may be taken. Some bases may be destroyed for a week or two, maybe a little longer. The visual story could look manageable. And then the real war begins because Iran has not been preparing for a ground invasion for 5 years. Iran has been preparing for this for 25 years. Underground bases, dispersed stockpiles, mountain infrastructure, missile and drone systems hidden far deeper than television audiences understand. A doctrine designed around one core idea: do not stop the Americans at the border. Stretch them, bleed them, slow them. Make every mile of progress turn into a permanent supply burden. Make every success expensive to hold. This is what America keeps misunderstanding in modern war. America is often very good at the first punch. It is the fight after the first punch that ruins them. And Iran has studied that very carefully. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, after the invasion. All of those wars taught the same lesson. An empire can dominate the opening sequence and still be defeated by the maintenance cost of the war it has started. So imagine what this looks like once the invasion settles into reality. Every helicopter becomes a target. Every fuel convoy becomes a target. Every exposed road becomes a drone corridor. Every temporary victory extends a supply line that now has to be defended forever. The invader begins by taking space. The invader ends by being owned by the cost of holding space. And remember something very important. In the current air war, Iran has not shown everything. By all serious accounts, they have more underground systems, more dispersed launch capacity, and more survival depth than what has already been burned on television. That means a ground invasion would not begin against a blank slate. It would begin against a defender that has spent decades preparing for the moment the Americans decide to come closer. Now let me go one layer deeper, because the military difficulty is not actually the real story. The real story is what a ground invasion of Iran would do to the wider system behind the war. The minute American ground troops go in, Iran has every incentive to widen the cost structure of the conflict. And the most obvious place to do that is Hormuz. Most people hear Hormuz and they think oil. That is true, but it is incomplete. Hormuz is not just an oil choke point, it is a system choke point. Energy runs through it, shipping psychology runs through it, insurance pricing runs through it, critical industrial inputs move through the wider Gulf system, fertilizer components matter here, chemicals matter here, trade routes matter here, market confidence matters here. Turn Hormuz from a tense waterway into a live battlefield, and the damage does not stay local, it spreads. If Iran faces a full ground invasion, then mining the strait, hitting tankers, threatening Gulf energy infrastructure, and trying to push oil toward $200 a barrel becomes a rational defensive escalation. And once that happens, the chain reaction begins. Fuel prices spike, food production becomes more expensive because fertilizer inputs get hit, semiconductor supply chains feel pressure because key industrial chemicals become harder to move, shipping insurers panic, routes change, markets flee towards safety. The poorest countries feel it first, then the middle income countries, then the politics of richer countries start to break under the cost. So the question changes. The question is no longer, can America win a ground war in Iran? The real question becomes this: what happens to the global economic order if a ground war in Iran turns Hormuz into a zone of prolonged fear, disruption, and pricing chaos? And this is where the deepest layer of the analysis begins. For decades, the American order has rested on something bigger than aircraft carriers. It has rested on a financial and energy architecture. The world needs oil. Oil flows through a system protected by American power. That system strengthens demand for dollars. That dollar demand helps finance American debt and American reach. The whole thing reinforces itself: security, energy, debt, reserve currency status, global capital demand. They all sit inside the same structure. Now ask what happens if the war America launches in demonstrating control starts to destabilize the very system that gave America control in the first place. If Gulf infrastructure burns, if energy exports become uncertain, if allied states begin to think American protection now creates as much risk as safety, then the formula starts to break. The old promise was simple: America secures the system. But a ground invasion of Iran creates a new question. What if America is no longer securing the system? What if America is becoming the largest source of instability inside the system? And once that doubt enters the room, things start to move. Countries begin looking for alternatives. Energy buyers begin thinking differently. Debt holders begin thinking differently. Reserve managers begin thinking differently. The petrodollar story does not die in one day, but the trust underneath it can be damaged much faster than people think. And that is why I do not think the deepest risk of an invasion is just military embarrassment. The deeper risk is structural self-harm. America could win battles and still help destroy the architecture that made American power possible. Now we arrive at the strangest part of all this. What if some people around Trump already know the old model is exhausted? What if they believe the age of cheap global guardianship is over? What if they think the dollar empire is too indebted, too hollow, too politically unsustainable, too dependent on a world America no longer wants to subsidize? What if their answer is not to save that order, but to break it faster and build something harder in its place. I know that sounds extreme, but look at the language Greater North America. Continental perimeter resources, food, oil, minerals, water manufacturing, Greenland, the Panama Canal, Canada, Mexico, Venezuela. That is not the language of a confident universal empire trying to calm the world. That is the language of a fortress being imagined. A fortress with food, a fortress with oil, a fortress with minerals, a fortress with industrial depth, a fortress with 2 oceans, a fortress that assumes the outside world is going to become meaner, more unstable, and more resource hungry, and wants to make sure North America is the last big self-sustaining bloc left standing. This is what I think people miss when they treat the Iran question as just another Middle East war. The war may be one instrument inside a much bigger transition. The old American model said this: protect the trade routes, hold the alliance system together, maintain the dollar order. Let the world free ride under your umbrella. Wall Street skims the benefits. The new model, if this is what they are moving towards, says something very different. The old system is too expensive, too indebted, too politically broken, too global, too weak at home. So break it before it breaks you. Pull power back into the continent, reindustrialize, remilitarize, let the wider world discover what instability feels like, then sell stability back to it at a premium. Now, is that brutal? Yes. Is it dangerous? Yes. Would ordinary people pay the price for this? Absolutely. But does it have an internal logic? Yes, it does. And that is why simply calling Trump stupid is not enough. A reckless man can still have a theory. A brutal strategy can still be coherent. In fact, some of the most dangerous strategies in history were coherent precisely because they accepted mass suffering as part of the design. This is where the Russia comparison becomes useful. Russia entered the Ukraine war, and the immediate Western conclusion was simple. Russia is overreaching. Russia is damaging itself. Russia is trapped. Some of that was true. But another thing was also true. The Russian state used the war to force industrial adaptation, harden domestic politics, militarize production, and prepare for a harsher version of the future. That does not mean the war was good for Russia in human terms. It means the state used crisis to restructure itself. What if one faction in Washington has looked at that and drawn its own conclusion? What if they believe America cannot continue as a universal empire built on debt, outsourcing, social fracture, and strategic overstretch? What if they think the only way out is controlled demolition, followed by continental reconstruction? Then the Iran war starts to look different. It is no longer just about forcing Tehran to submit. It becomes part of a wider attempt to bury the old imperial template and justify a new one. That does not mean it works. Plans like this often unleash forces much larger than the planner. Ground invasions do not obey manifestos. Oil shocks do not respect ideology. Financial systems do not collapse neatly in ways that reward the architect more than the victim. So I am not predicting a master plan that succeeds beautifully. I am saying there is a possible strategic intention hiding inside what many people dismiss as pure chaos. Now, let me give you the real scenario tree. Scenario 1, America invades. It gets bogged down. It cannot hold Iran. Hormuz becomes more dangerous. Energy shock spreads. The old dollar order weakens. America suffers a historic strategic defeat in the Middle East. That is the nightmare scenario. If you still think Washington is trying to preserve the old empire. Scenario 2, America invades. It still gets bogged down. The wider world economy fractures, but North America uses the resulting chaos to consolidate resource power, industrial capacity, and strategic dependence in its favor. In this version, America loses the old game and uses the loss to launch a new one. Scenario 3. The threat of invasion is itself part of the strategy, the true preparation, the reserve language. The escalation mood, all of it is used to force negotiations, reorder alliances, and prepare the American public psychologically for a harsher continental doctrine without actually committing to a full occupation. In some ways, this may be the most rational version available to them because a real ground invasion could produce consequences too large even for its advocates to control. But in every scenario, one truth remains. The people who pay first are not the strategists. It is the ordinary people, Americans who would be sent to fight Iranians who would be bombed, displaced, or buried. Families in poorer countries who would discover that when oil and food prices explode, they are always first in line to suffer. That is the constant truth of empire, the powerful design, the moves, ordinary people absorb the cost. So when somebody asks me what happens if the United States invades Iran, my answer is this. First, the military operation becomes uglier and more expensive than its advocates are admitting. Second, the economic consequences spread far beyond Iran and far beyond America. Third, the deeper target is not just Tehran. The deeper target may be the transition from an exhausted American empire to a harder North American fortress built for a poorer, rougher, more fractured world. And that is why this question matters so much, because if the invasion happens, we will not just be watching a war. We will be watching a test of whether the old American order is still being defended, or whether the people who claim to represent it are now preparing to bury it and build something else in the ashes. And if you understand that, then you understand why this is not just another Middle East crisis. This is a question about what kind of world is being prepared on the other side of the fire.